I cheated on my husband with a younger man. The shocking truth that could ruin us both. Chapter 1. The tension beneath the surface. Sarah sat in the living room, the faint hum of the television filling the silence. She wasn't watching it though, her mind was elsewhere, wandering into the past and the what-ifs of her life. Her husband, Michael, was sitting beside her, absorbed in his work, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside her. They had been married for nearly 10 years, and while there was comfort in their routine, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. It wasn't that she didn't love Michael, she did in a way, but over the years, their passion had faded into something lukewarm and predictable. Their conversations were about the mundane, the everyday. Gone were the nights of excitement, the spontaneous kisses, the longing looks. Now, they were partners in life's responsibilities, but no longer lovers in the way they once had been. Sarah's phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from Ethan, the man who had been occupying her thoughts far more than she cared to admit. Ethan was younger than her, a man she had met through mutual friends. He was charming, with an air of mystery that intrigued her. The first time they had spoken, she had felt a connection, a spark that she hadn't felt in years. Thinking about you, the message read, simple yet charged with meaning. Sarah's heart raced as she stared at the words. She knew she shouldn't be talking to him, not like this. But there was something about Ethan that drew her in, something she couldn't resist. She quickly glanced at Michael, who was still focused on his laptop, oblivious to her turmoil. Without thinking, she typed back. "You shouldn't say things like that," she replied, her fingers trembling slightly as she hit send. But even as she sent the message, she knew she didn't want him to stop. The thrill of the forbidden, the excitement of the unknown, it was intoxicating. Chapter 2. A Moment of Weakness. A few days later, Sarah found herself at a cafe, sitting across from Ethan. It had been his idea to meet, and despite her reservations, she had agreed. She told herself it was innocent, just two friends catching up. But as she sat there, her heart pounding in her chest, she knew it was more than that. Ethan looked at her with those piercing blue eyes, his gaze lingering on her longer than it should have. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. She couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at her like that, with desire, with hunger. They talked about everything and nothing, but the conversation was just a backdrop to the unspoken tension between them. Sarah could feel it in the way Ethan's eyes followed her movements, in the way his leg brushed against hers under the table. She should have been uncomfortable, should have put a stop to it. But instead, she found herself leaning into it, craving the attention, the thrill. As they left the cafe, Ethan touched her arm, his fingers lingering on her skin. It was a small gesture, but it sent a jolt of electricity through her. Sarah looked up at him, her heart racing, and for a moment, she thought he might kiss her. She wanted him to. But he didn't. Instead, he smiled, a knowing smile, and walked away, leaving Sarah standing there, breathless and confused. Chapter 3. The First Step. After that day, things changed between them. Their messages became more frequent, more intimate. What had started as harmless flirting had quickly turned into something more. Sarah found herself thinking about Ethan constantly, replaying their conversations in her mind, imagining what could have happened if she had let him kiss her that day. Her thoughts grew darker, more dangerous. She would lie in bed next to Michael, her mind filled with fantasies of Ethan. She imagined his hands on her, his lips on her neck. The guilt gnawed at her, but she couldn't stop. The more she thought about Ethan, the more she wanted him. One evening, after a particularly heated conversation with Ethan, Sarah found herself in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. She had dressed up that day, put on makeup, even though she had no reason to. She wasn't going anywhere, wasn't meeting anyone, but she had done it anyway for him, even though he wasn't there. She ran her fingers through her hair, her thoughts drifting to Ethan. She imagined what it would feel like to have him standing behind her, his hands on her hips, his breath hot against her neck. She closed her eyes, letting the fantasy take over, her body responding to the images in her mind. But then Michael called her from the other room, breaking the spell. Sarah opened her eyes and stared at herself in the mirror, guilt washing over her. What was she doing? This wasn't who she was. She was a wife, a mother. She had a family. But deep down, she knew that something inside her had changed, and there was no going back. Chapter 4. Crossing Boundaries. The messages between Sarah and Ethan grew bolder, more explicit. What had started as innocent flirting had evolved into something much more dangerous. Ethan wasn't shy about what he wanted, and Sarah found herself wanting it too. They made plans to meet again, this time with the understanding that it wouldn't just be coffee. Sarah was nervous, her mind racing with the possibilities of what could happen. She knew she was playing with fire, knew she was risking everything. But the thought of Ethan, the thrill of the unknown, was too strong to resist. They met at a hotel on the edge of town, a place where no one would recognize them. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she walked through the lobby, her hands trembling as she opened the door to the room. Ethan was already there, waiting for her, his eyes dark with desire. For a moment, they just stood there, the air between them thick with tension. Then Ethan stepped forward, closing the distance between them. He reached out and touched her face, his fingers soft against her skin. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat as he leaned in, his lips brushing against hers. The kiss was slow at first, tentative, but it quickly deepened, the passion between them igniting like a wildfire. Sarah's mind screamed at her to stop, to pull away, but her body wouldn't listen. She had crossed the line, and there was no turning back now. Chapter 5. The Aftermath. Sarah lay in bed that night, her mind spinning with guilt and excitement. The heat of Ethan's touch lingered on her skin, but now, in the darkness of her bedroom, the weight of what she had done settled heavily on her. Michael was asleep beside her, his breathing slow and steady, completely unaware of the betrayal that had taken place earlier that day. She glanced at him, feeling a pang of guilt, but it was quickly overwhelmed by the rush of exhilaration she felt from her time with Ethan. Her thoughts drifted back to the hotel room, to the way Ethan had looked at her, touched her, made her feel alive in ways she hadn't felt in years. It was wrong, she knew that, but it was also intoxicating, and she wasn't ready to let it go. The next morning, as Sarah stood in the kitchen making coffee, her phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from Ethan. "I can't stop thinking about yesterday. When can we do it again?" Her heart skipped a beat as she read the message. She glanced toward the living room, where Michael was sitting, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface of their quiet life. Sarah bit her lip, torn between the guilt that gnawed at her and the thrill that came with Ethan's words. She typed back quickly, her fingers trembling. Soon. Chapter 6. The web of lies. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah's affair with Ethan continued in secret. They met whenever they could, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for more. Each encounter only deepened her feelings for him, even as the guilt continued to weigh on her. At home, things with Michael remained unchanged, but Sarah could feel the distance growing between them. Every time he kissed her, every time he reached out to hold her hand, she felt the weight of her betrayal pressing down on her. But she couldn't stop. The pull of her desire for Ethan was too strong. One evening, as Sarah sat in the kitchen scrolling through her phone, a thought crossed her mind that she hadn't been able to shake for days. What if Michael found out? The thought terrified her, but there was another part of her, a darker, more reckless part, that was almost excited by the idea. The danger of being caught only added to the thrill of it all. She was playing with fire, and she knew it. But as she sat there, her phone buzzing with another message from Ethan, she couldn't bring herself to care. "I need to see you," his message read. Sarah glanced at the clock. Michael would be home in an hour. She hesitated for a moment, then quickly typed back. "Come over. We only have an hour." Chapter 7. The Dangerous Encounter. Ethan arrived not long after. Sarah's heart raced as she let him in, her body buzzing with anticipation. They didn't waste any time. The moment the door closed behind him, Ethan pulled her into his arms, his lips crashing against hers in a kiss filled with hunger and urgency. Sarah knew it was risky. Michael could walk in at any moment, but that only made it more thrilling. The danger, the excitement, it was intoxicating. They moved to the living room, where Ethan pushed her against the wall, his hands exploring her body with a familiarity that had grown over their secret meetings. Sarah's thoughts were a whirlwind of desire and guilt, but in that moment, all she could focus on was Ethan, his touch, his breath hot against her skin. Time seemed to blur, the minutes slipping away faster than Sarah could keep track of. But then, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway jolted her back to reality. Michael was home. Panic surged through her. She quickly pushed Ethan away, her heart pounding in her chest. "You have to go," she whispered urgently, glancing toward the front door. Ethan smirked, clearly enjoying the thrill of the situation. "Relax," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We have a few minutes." But Sarah wasn't willing to take that chance. She shoved him toward the back door, her pulse racing as the front door began to creak open. Ethan slipped out just in time, disappearing into the shadows of the evening as Michael stepped inside. Sarah forced a smile, her heart still pounding in her chest as she greeted her husband. "Hey, how was work?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Michael smiled tiredly, oblivious to the chaos that had just unfolded in his own home. "Long day," he muttered, dropping his keys on the table. Sarah exhaled a shaky breath, relieved that her secret was still safe for now. Chapter 8: A Suspicious Change. As the weeks passed, Sarah's affair with Ethan became harder to hide. She found herself constantly on edge, always looking over her shoulder, afraid that someone might notice the changes in her behavior. Michael, though, seemed oblivious, or at least she thought he was. But one evening, as they sat at dinner, Michael set his fork down and looked at her with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "Is there something going on, Sarah?" he asked, his voice calm, but his eyes filled with suspicion. Sarah froze, her mind racing. Did he know? Had he found out? Her palms began to sweat as she struggled to come up with a response. "Of course not," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "Why would you think that?" Michael's gaze didn't waver. "You've been different lately, distant, distracted." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I've just been stressed," she said, her voice sounding more confident than she felt. "Work's been hectic, and I guess it's just been getting to me." Michael studied her for a moment longer, then nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. But the look in his eyes told her that he wasn't entirely convinced. That night, as she lay in bed next to him, Sarah's mind raced. She knew she was playing a dangerous game, and it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. Chapter 9: The Unraveling. The unraveling of Sarah's carefully constructed life began slowly. It started with small things, missed phone calls, text messages left unanswered. Ethan was growing impatient. He wanted more from her, more time, more commitment. But Sarah was beginning to realize that she couldn't give it to him. As much as she craved the excitement and the passion, the guilt was starting to eat away at her. Every time she looked at Michael, every time she thought about their life together, she felt like she was suffocating under the weight of her lies. And then, one day, the unthinkable happened. Michael found her phone. Chapter 10: The Discovery. It was a typical Saturday afternoon when Sarah's life took a sudden turn. She had just returned from a quick trip to the grocery store when she found Michael sitting at the kitchen table, her phone open in front of him. Panic gripped her heart as she realized he had discovered her secret. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, his voice steady but laced with an edge of anger. Her stomach dropped. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to play innocent, though she could feel the blood rushing to her cheeks. Michael looked up, his eyes cold and piercing. "I found your phone. Your texts. Who is Ethan?" Her mind raced. She could feel the walls closing in around her. "Michael, I can explain." "Explain what?" he interrupted, his voice rising. "That you've been cheating on me? That you've been lying to my face while I've been working hard to provide for us?" Tears pricked at her eyes, but she fought them back. "It was a mistake. I never meant for it to happen," she pleaded, desperate to find a way to salvage their marriage. "A mistake?" Michael's laughter was bitter and harsh. "You think this is just a mistake? You've been seeing him behind my back, and you call that a mistake?" His disappointment cut deeper than any knife. Sarah felt a wave of shame wash over her. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. It just happened." Michael shook his head, disbelief etched on his face. "How long has this been going on?" "A few months," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I swear, it means nothing. You mean everything to me, Michael." "Do I?" He shot back, his gaze piercing. "You're in love with him, aren't you?" The question hung heavy in the air, and Sarah felt the truth choking her. She opened her mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. The truth was, she was drawn to Ethan in a way she hadn't expected, but she loved Michael in her own way too. I don't know, she finally admitted, feeling a wave of despair wash over her. It's complicated. Complicated, Michael repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You're telling me that sleeping with another man is complicated. You made your choice, Sarah. Chapter 11. The break. Silence engulfed the kitchen, thick and suffocating. Sarah could hear her heart beating wildly in her chest as Michael stood up, his expression hardening. Where do we go from here? He asked, his voice icy. I want to fix this, she pleaded, reaching for his arm, but he stepped back, avoiding her touch. Fix this? You think a simple "I'm sorry" is enough? You've shattered my trust. How can I ever believe anything you say again? Please, she begged, her voice breaking. I love you. I want to be with you. Then why did you go to him? Michael's voice rose again, filled with hurt and betrayal. Why did you throw everything away for a fling? It wasn't just a fling. I don't know how it happened, but I got lost along the way, she cried, her emotions spilling over. You don't understand what it was like. Oh, I think I understand perfectly, he shot back. You chose him over me. No, Sarah insisted, tears streaming down her face. I didn't choose him. I was confused. I made a mistake, but I want to make it right. Right? Michael scoffed, shaking his head in disbelief. You think you can just wave a magic wand and make this all go away? You've hurt me, Sarah. You've betrayed me. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this. With that, he turned away, leaving Sarah standing there, feeling utterly broken. The weight of her choices bore down on her, and she felt the world collapsing around her. Chapter 12. A Fractured Heart. The days that followed were a blur of pain and confusion. Michael moved to the spare room, and the distance between them felt insurmountable. Sarah found herself wandering through the house like a ghost, haunted by the remnants of their life together. She tried to reach out to him, to express her regret and longing for reconciliation, but every time she approached, he shut her down. I need time, he would say, his voice flat and devoid of warmth. But as the days turned into weeks, Sarah began to realize that time wasn't going to fix this. The silence between them grew heavier, and the love that once filled their home felt like a distant memory. Meanwhile, Ethan was still messaging her, the thrill of their secret rendezvous now overshadowed by guilt. One night, unable to resist, she replied. Can we talk? Ethan's response was immediate. I need to see you. She felt a rush of excitement mixed with trepidation. Meeting Ethan again would only complicate things further, but the temptation was too strong to resist. That weekend, under the cover of darkness, she snuck out to meet him at a secluded park, her heart racing with a mix of desire and dread. Chapter 13. The Confrontation. Ethan was waiting for her, his expression a mix of concern and desire as he saw her approach. I was beginning to think you wouldn't come, he said, his eyes lighting up with mischief. I almost didn't, Sarah admitted, glancing around to ensure no one was watching. Things have gotten complicated. Ethan stepped closer, his gaze piercing through her defenses. Complicated how? Did he find out? Yes, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. He's devastated. I don't know what to do, Ethan. I don't want to lose him. Ethan's expression shifted, disappointment clouding his features. So you're choosing him then? I don't know, she exclaimed, frustration boiling over. I can't just throw away everything we've built together, but I can't ignore how I feel about you either. Maybe you should figure it out before we meet again, he said, his voice hardening, because I'm not interested in being your second choice. Before she could respond, he turned away, leaving her standing there, torn between two worlds. Chapter 14. The breaking point. Days passed, and Sarah was a wreck. The guilt of her actions weighed heavily on her, and the tension in the house with Michael was palpable. She wanted to make things right, but every attempt she made was met with cold indifference. One evening, she decided to confront Michael again. She found him sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the television. Michael, we need to talk, she said, her heart pounding. He glanced at her but didn't respond. Please, just listen, she begged, sitting beside him. I know I messed up. I'm so sorry. I want to fix this. I love you. Michael turned to her, his expression guarded. You say that, but how can I trust you again? You've already shown me your true colors. I know, and I hate myself for it, but I want to make it right. Can't we start over? She reached for his hand, but he pulled away. Starting over means rebuilding trust. You've broken mine, Sarah. It's not that easy, he replied, his voice heavy with hurt. I'm willing to do whatever it takes, she insisted, tears filling her eyes. I can't lose you. Maybe it's too late for that, he said quietly, and her heart shattered. The silence that followed was deafening, and Sarah felt the weight of her choices crashing down on her. She had lost herself in a moment of weakness, and now she risked losing everything she had ever wanted. Chapter 15. The Choice. After that night, Sarah made a decision. She couldn't continue living in this limbo, torn between her feelings for Ethan and her life with Michael. She reached out to Ethan, asking to meet one last time. They met at a quiet cafe, and as she sat across from him, her heart raced. I can't keep doing this, she began, her voice steady. I need to figure out what I really want. Ethan's expression was inscrutable, but she could see the glimmer of frustration in his eyes. So, what does that mean for us? He asked, leading in slightly. It means I can't keep seeing you. I need to focus on my marriage and figure out if there's still a chance for us, she admitted, her voice wavering. I can't keep lying to Michael. Ethan's gaze hardened. So you're choosing him? After everything we've shared? I don't know if it's a choice, she replied, her heart breaking. I just know I have to try. I owe him that much. Ethan leaned back, crossing his arms. You realize you're making a mistake, right? You'll always wonder what could have been. Maybe, she whispered, tears threatening to spill. But I can't keep running away from my life. I need to face this. With that, Sarah stood up, leaving Ethan behind, feeling the weight of her decision settle over her. Chapter 16. The Reckoning. Returning home, Sarah found Michael sitting at the table, a look of concern etched across his face. He knew something was different about her, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of hope. Hey, she said softly, approaching him. Hey, he replied, his voice low. I want to talk, she said, her heart racing. I've made my choice. Michael looked up, a mixture of curiosity and caution in his gaze. What do you mean? I'm done running, she confessed. I ended things with Ethan. I want to focus on us. I want to try to fix our marriage. Michael studied her for a moment, the tension in the room thick as he weighed her words. Are you sure? Because this isn't something I can just forgive easily. I know, Sarah said, her voice steady. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I want to earn back your trust. I'm sorry for everything. The silence stretched between them, but finally, Michael nodded, a small flicker of hope sparking in his eyes. Okay, but it's going to take time, and you'll have to prove to me that you mean it. I will, she promised, her heart swelling with relief. In that moment, Sarah felt a renewed sense of determination. She was ready to face the consequences of her actions and fight for her marriage. Chapter 17. Rebuilding Trust. The road to rebuilding trust was long and challenging. Sarah dedicated herself to being present for Michael, showing him that she was committed to making things work. They spent evenings talking, reestablishing their connection, and taking baby steps toward healing their fractured relationship. Slowly but surely, Michael began to open up. He shared his feelings of betrayal and hurt, and Sarah listened, absorbing his pain and acknowledging her mistakes. There were moments when the weight of her past actions threatened to overwhelm her, but she fought through them, determined to prove her love for him. As they navigated this new phase of their relationship, Sarah found herself falling in love with Michael all over again. They shared laughter and intimate moments, and while the shadows of betrayal still lingered, they began to create new memories together. Chapter 18. A New Beginning. Months passed, and as winter melted into spring, Sarah and Michael found themselves growing closer. They took weekend trips, explored new hobbies, and started to dream about their future together again. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Sarah turned to Michael, her heart full. Thank you for giving us another chance, she said softly. He smiled, taking her hand in his. You've worked hard to rebuild what we had. I can see how much you care. I do, she replied earnestly. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. You mean everything to me. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Sarah realized that while the scars of betrayal would always be there, they had forged a stronger bond through their struggles. They had come out on the other side, ready to embrace their new beginning together. Epilogue: The echoes of the past. Though the shadows of her past remained, Sarah learned to embrace them as part of her journey. The affair with Ethan became a distant memory, a lesson that reminded her of the importance of honesty and commitment. As she and Michael moved forward, they both understood that trust would take time to fully rebuild, but they were willing to work for it. Together, they had faced the storm, and now they stood hand in hand, ready to face whatever life threw their way. Their love had been tested, but it had emerged stronger, a testament to their resilience and devotion.